Well, good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is my weekly internet show. Nice to be back with you guys. Nice opportunity to share with you some libertarian perspectives on what's going on in the world. Pentagon's back in the news. Well, Pentagon's always in the news. The military's always in the news. I mean, that's the thing about living under an empire, that the empire is always generating news. The military really is, well, unfortunately, it's become really the foundation of American society. When you stop to think about it, it's really more deeply embedded in American society, American culture, than the military in Egypt, which of course is taking the position that it comes first. It's the foundation of Egyptian society, and then people build their government on top of that. It's pretty much the same here. I mean, the military is a basic, fundamental bedrock principle of American life. When you look at all the cities and towns that have bases, ask yourself, what are all these bases for? It almost reminds you of the old West, where you had forts to protect the cities. And all these bases are like to protect the cities. But from what? I mean, what is the point of all these bases all over the United States? Of course, the obvious question is, what's the point of all those, 700 to 1,000 bases? We don't even know the right number because they won't tell us, that are all over the world, in more than 130 countries. I was thinking about this this past week about Switzerland. This friend and I were having an exchange about this whole issue of the military-industrial complex and the empire and so forth. And I started thinking about Switzerland, because Switzerland basically has a foreign policy that is very much, mirrors the foreign policy in which America was founded. Our founding principles, as far as, rejecting empire, rejecting militarism, a big standing professional military force. The Swiss simply pretty much take the position our American ancestors did, that truly concentrate on genuine defense of your country in case of an invasion. Now, when I say defense, I mean genuine defense. That the Swiss say we're prepared to defend our country from an invasion, as compared to the Department of Defense in the United States, which has, Navy policing the world and troops all over the world, and attacking countries with no declaration of war requirement, and wars of aggression like against Iraq and so forth. That's, they call that the Department of Defense, but it's obviously not defense. It's certainly not defense in the way the Swiss look at defense. And the Swiss have an interesting life, because imagine going through life without angsting, tremendous anxiety and fear of, oh my gosh, who's going to have control over Iraq? Is it going to be the Iranians? Is it going to be the Saudis? Is it going to be the Sunnis? Is it going to be, the Shiites? Or angsting over, the election in Nicaragua, like, is Ortega going to win again? And oh my gosh, national security's at stake, and angsting over the troops in the Middle East. The Swiss don't go through any of those anxieties. I mean, they're like indifferent. They understand that things are happening all over the world. Things are happening within countries. Politicians are attacking each other, criticizing each other, condemning each other, assassinating each other. There's wars taking place between countries. And they just keep going about their business, prepared to defend themselves from an attack. And notice, they don't even worry about, this big fear of, Iran's coming to Europe. Iran's coming to Europe with all its troops, which is so ridiculous. I mean, but that's what empires do. They create these enemies, and they create these boogeymen and these dark scenarios, and they get the citizenry all riled up in color codes and, like Homeland Security experiments, where they're having this big test in the next couple of weeks to make sure everybody's ready in an emergency. And, the Swiss just yawn. They just prepare to defend. Everybody's got, or most everybody's got, an assault rifle in his house. They know how to use it. They're prepared to use it. The entire nation is built for defense, and nobody bothers them. I mean, notice in World War I, nobody bothered the Swiss. World War II, nobody bothered the Swiss. Why? Because everyone knows that if you invade Switzerland to try to get their gold or whatever, you're going to pay a very high price. I mean, you're probably not going to win because those people are fierce fighters, and they're fighting on their terrain. But even if you were to win, the Swiss say we're going to make you pay such an enormous price that your win's really going to turn to a loss because we're going to kill so many of your invading soldiers, and they're all good shots. I mean, there's a famous story of it was like in the 1800s or so, where this German prince or something like that comes over to Switzerland and he says, "What would you do if my 100,000 man army invaded your country, and you only have 10,000 men prepared to defend?" Something like that. I don't have the numbers correct, and the Swiss guy says, "Oh, there's no problem. The 10,000 Swiss men would take their positions, fire 10 shots, and go home." And I mean, that's their confidence in terms of defending their country, and they feel the same way today. And I mean, I've traveled in Switzerland, and at the train station there was soldiers going off on weekend duty or something, with an assault rifle right there in the train station. And nobody was freaking out. The FBI wasn't there, and the CIA and stuff, trying to figure out terrorist threats and so forth. In other words, it's a normal way of life, and that's the founding fathers' vision of the United States: is no empire, no militarism, no military-industrial complex. I mean, that was the term that Eisenhower used when he warned Americans. He'd seen 8 years of the national security state, and he warned Americans, watch out for what he called a military-industrial complex, but really it was he had in there the term military-industrial congressional complex. And so it's in the news today because of the debt ceiling debate. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, you'll recall the debt ceiling debate when, the amount of debt that the U.S. government has incurred reached a certain ceiling, a maximum. And why is there that maximum? Because there's an acknowledgement that too much debt for a government is a very bad thing. It's a very dangerous thing. You want proof of that? Look what's happening in Greece. Okay? Now, they don't even have a warfare state there like we do. They only have a welfare state like we do. And yet they were just spending money out the gazoo, more and more people demanding welfare. I want my pensions, I want my retirement, I want my Social Security, I want my Medicare, I want my Medicaid, I want everything free education and so forth. And the government, of course, gave it to them because when people are demanding the dole, what government's going to stand up against them? And for a while, the tax revenues were keeping up. But, people were demanding more and more freebies, entitlements. I'm entitled to this. That the government started borrowing the money from the private sector to keep funneling money, in the form of the dole to people, until finally the debt got so high. And they were keeping it secret for a while, much like the Federal Reserve keeps its operations secret. And they finally, it got to the point where speculators realized what was going on, that the amount of debt was so high that the government couldn't pay its bills anymore. I mean, with the tax revenues it was receiving, it couldn't pay the dole plus the interest on the debt, much less liquidate the principal. And they couldn't keep taxing society because then they destroy the tax base that generates at least that level of taxation that they're accustomed to receiving. So if they impose more taxes, the actual revenues start to decrease. So they were stuck. They were busted. They were deadbeats. And then they start begging the German taxpayers, bail us out, and so forth. Well, that's your proof that this debt ceiling business is horrific. I mean, the debt ceiling is good. It's the debt that's horrific. That this is the way governments throw nations into bankruptcy. They just keep borrowing and borrowing. I mean, this is essentially one of the reasons why the British colonists were so angry with their own government, the British government. Just massive, out of control spending. So the king had to keep raising taxes and so forth. And of course, the ultimate result of these empires is they go busted, they go bankrupt, but not after spending and borrowing and taxing. And that's the road the United States is on. I mean, we all know that. And the debt ceiling is an acknowledgement of that. It's saying, We are not going to borrow any more money than what has already been borrowed. That's the ceiling. And as I have written over and over again, it's a sham. It's a fraud. In the months before the debt ceiling, I said, let me tell you what's going to happen. You can go back and read my blog. I mean, I repeated over and over again, the Republicans are going to cave. Now, everybody knew the Democrats were going to cave because President Obama wants, to spend and borrow more money, just like George W. Bush did, just like all these people do when they're in office. They want to spend and borrow and spend and borrow, and then, of course, tax and inflate to pay it all. And so I kept saying there at the Future of Freedom Foundation, I said, the Republicans are going to cave. And I have friends, oh, no, Jacob, this time, boy, this is the Tea Party crowd. There are the newbies in there, man. They're going to hang in there fast. And I said, watch, just watch. And it was so amusing watching Republicans going on like Judge Andrew Napolitano's Freedom Watch and saying, Judge, we're going to stand fast this time. We're Republicans and we're conservative and we're Tea Party, and by golly, we're not going to cave this time. We've caved before, but we're not going to cave this time. And I kept writing, nonsense. Republicans always cave. When it comes to principle, there are no principles. They are going to cave. And so all the way up to the last week, and people were saying, Jacob, you might be wrong this time. Nonsense. I knew they would cave, and they did cave. Okay, I mean they caved at the last. They shouldn't have caved. They should have acknowledged or continued to acknowledge that any more debt's going to be horrible for this country. They should have just said, you got to live within your means, whatever that means. The taxes come in. You prioritize, you decide what you're going to pay. If that means liquidating the debt, paying the interest on the debt, which, by the way, they plan to do as a top priority, fine. Does that mean that the dole recipients might have to live without their dole? Absolutely. So what? You live within your means because you're overextended. That's what a family does. Family just starts slashing its expenses when he gets overextended. It has no choice. But you see, not with the feds. They just say, we'll just keep borrowing and we'll just keep borrowing. And they had this sham deal where they were trying to justify what they had done by saying, oh, well, we've struck a deal. We've struck a deal where there's going to be this super committee that's going to have to cut $1.2 trillion from the spending. And then if that doesn't work out, if they don't strike a deal, there's going to be automatic cuts across the board on the military and the welfare state, both the welfare state and the warfare state. Well, okay, so that was the way they rationalized and justified what they had done. They had caved in. They had said, President Obama, we will now permit you to borrow more money to finance your out-of-control spending, but as a condition of this, we're going to cut spending, for 1.2 trillion over the next 10 years. I mean, that in itself is a joke. 10 years. I mean, if when you're overextended, you slash your programs now. You start abolishing programs. Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce. Go after the easy ones first. Legalize drugs. Get rid of the drug war. The DEA. All those ridiculous, inane, destructive expenses. But you don't say, oh, well, we're gonna bind congressmen 10 years from now to cut spending. That's ridiculous. I mean, in the meantime, spending keeps going up, and they keep borrowing more, and they just keep shoving the cuts down to future members of Congress. Well, of course, what happens 10 years from now? Those congressmen say, hey, we never voted on this. We don't want to be voted out of office. We're not going to have any more courage than they did. We're going to pass this thing on 10 years from now, and they're going to keep spending and borrowing. I mean, that's the nature of government. And so they had this sham deal, which it's turned out to be a sham. Well, now it looks like they're not going to be able to cut a deal. Now they're still negotiating and so forth about what to cut and how much taxes to raise. It's going to be interesting because the Republicans have always said, we're not going to raise taxes. And I already saw one Republican on television starting to hedge his bets and hemming and hawing and so forth. But they're already saying if there's no agreement, guess what the Republicans and the Democrats, some Democrats, are proposing? To undo the agreement that they had. the agreement that said if the super committee doesn't reach a deal, we slash expenses across the board. Now, I forget what the percentage is, but maybe it's enough to equal 1.2 trillion. But it's a flat equal across the board. And they're saying, oh, no, the military couldn't do this. The Pentagon couldn't survive. Well, we all know what's happening. The Pentagon is mobilizing its forces. It's contacting its contractors, its subcontractors, all the people that supply the coffee and the meals and the soft drinks, all the people that are dependent on the military largesse. It's mobilizing them and saying, contact your congressman, tell them what a disaster it is, that they might lose their base in their hometown. You know, that's the big fear tactic. Oh, you're going to lose your base, you know. This is going to be jobs for America. Your cost, national security is at stake. The terrorists are going to win out. The communists are going to conquer us, and Iran's coming over to take over the IRS. And I mean, it's ridiculous. And this is one of the things that Eisenhower was talking about the military-industrial congressional complex. That was the term that he originally had in his speech, or the draft of the speech, and he took out the congressional part at the last minute. But that's the point of this thing. I mean, you see, the congressmen get scared to death because they're getting all these calls from the contractors and the subcontractors that have been mobilized by the Pentagon. The whole military-industrial complex has now gone into action to pressure the members of Congress, to scare them. You're going to lose a base. You're going to lose a contracting service over here in your district. And boy, the press is going to make a big deal out of it. You're going to be called an inefficient congressman. You're going to lose. And so the congressmen are now shaking in their boots because they might lose power. They might lose the next election. And here we are. Now they're going to undo the deal. The deal that they used to justify raising the debt ceiling in the first place. They were saying, well, okay, we caved, but here is the bone we give you to the American people. Now they're going to take away the bone. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And notice that not one of them, including the big mainstream media that were crying, you know, catastrophe, catastrophe if the debt ceiling isn't raised. Not one of them is saying, get prepared for the next debt ceiling when it comes. Because you see, when the debt ceiling, this new debt ceiling is reached in 2 years from now or so, they cannot go beyond it. I mean, that we all know that now, okay? That's a ceiling. They're not legally go beyond, they can't legally go on top of that, borrowing more money. So you would think the mainstream media would be saying, hey, you guys got off the hook this time. You know, they raised the limit on you, but not next time, because the ceiling's a ceiling. That you need to start abolishing programs, abolishing agencies. You need to do stuff really drastically right now, because you're not going to be able to borrow more money. You're not going to be able to add more debt 2 years from now. Of course not. They're not saying that. The mainstream media is not saying it. I told you they would laugh after the debt ceiling was raised, and they are laughing. They're laughing their tails off because they cried all this Chicken Little stuff. The world's going to fall in. The terrorists are going to conquer America. The welfare programs are going to be, everybody's going to be dying in the streets with no welfare programs. And then, of course, they scare everybody saying, oh, this is irresponsible that you're not raising the debt ceiling. They get it passed, and they're laughing all the way. I mean, just laughing, because they know that 2 years from now, they're going to do the exact same thing, which means out of control spending, out of control debt. You know, they're going to start inflating the currency like they're starting to do in Europe. You know, they're starting to debase the currency. It's amazing to me that the Germans are letting this happen. I mean, to me, the Germans, I'm surprised that the Germans just didn't say, Greece, out of here. Go. Leave the European Union. You know, if you can't choose between, you know, fiscal responsibility and the dole, then out of here. But instead, they're going along with the deal. In my opinion, the Germans made the biggest mistake of all by giving up the Deutschmark for this euro. I mean, you know, they're at the mercy now of Italy and Greece and all these, you know, welfare state countries. I mean, the ideal, of course, is a free market monetary system, both for the American people and the European people, the people of the world. I mean, I have no doubts people would turn to gold. I mean, that would be your common currency. Your currency all over the world. And it doesn't have to be mandated by government. It can simply be a market process. Get rid of paper money, legal tender laws, and let people transact in whatever money happens to come into existence through the market process. I happen to believe it'll be gold, but you don't ever know. It's impossible to predict, especially with the technological changes that are constantly occurring. But then at least you'd have a common currency. You know, like people would be pricing everything in gold coins or silver coins or copper coins. But, you know, unfortunately we live in a world with irredeemable paper money that's used to finance this welfare state. And, of course, here in America, the warfare state and the welfare state. And, you know, the result is bankruptcy and debauchery and you know, with absolutely no redeeming values at all. I mean, you know, look, what are they spending money on right now on the Pentagon side over in Afghanistan? You know, I just saw. I mean, what's the point of this? They've been there 10 years, and all they're doing is propping up a crooked, corrupt, brutal, tortuous regime. And you know, Karzai sits there and says, "Well, in a war between Pakistan and the United States, Afghanistan's going to side with Pakistan." Well, the U.S. now goes ballistic over that. You know, it's supposed to be a sovereign country, you know, Afghanistan. Well, hey, we invaded to free them, you know, from the Taliban and so forth, and to bring sovereignty and independence. That's not reality. That's not the way empires work. And by the way, did you see where that general got relieved of command, a U.S. general? Because he called a spade a spade. He said, hey, what's this deal with Karzai, you know, going with the Pakistanis instead of an Americans in case of a war? Didn't we just pay him $11 billion? Well, what's that general talking about? He's talking about tax money, welfare for the dictator, Karzai, who's never been elected because a crooked election where you're stuffing the ballot box is no election. He's a crooked puppet of the U.S. government, the U.S. empire. And this general says, hey, how come he isn't loyal to the empire in case of a war with Pakistan and the U.S.? Well, because Karzai's sitting there saying, I thought we were an independent and sovereign regime. I didn't know I was supposed to be a colony of the empire. And well, what do you think the money's for? Well, it really exposes the whole crooked, corrupt game. That the money's taken from U.S. taxpayers, it's put in the hands of these corrupt dictators, and they're supposed to be loyal to the empire. And why is there a war between Pakistan and the United States being talked about? Because the Pakistanis won't kill their own people who were resisting the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, a 10-year occupation. I mean, the same group that's resisting the occupation was resisting the Soviet occupation. And back then, you know, that group was considered, you know, heroic and courageous and pro-freedom, and they were freedom fighters, you see. And because they're trying to end the U.S. occupation, the U.S. wants Pakistan to kill their own people. Well, and Pakistan, of course, is resisting it because you don't know what's going to happen then when a government starts killing its own people and what kind of revolutions. And I mean, the whole thing's a mess, and it's all a mess because of this imperial role of the U.S. government in the world. You know, we've argued you should never have gone into the Pentagon. You should never have gone into Afghanistan with military invasion. You've killed countless people that had nothing to do with 9/11. We should have treated 9/11 the way we treated the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center as a criminal problem. But, you know, here you have this giant excuse me, warfare state empire. Now, on the other side is the welfare state. I mean, here you've got this gigantic welfare state, and nobody wants to let go of their dole, and that's why this situation in Greece is no different from the U.S. situation. That it's just delaying the inevitable, that, you know, bankruptcy down the line, because the Greek people do not want to let go of their dole, and they're not going to let go of their dole. All these talks about, austerity measures and stuff, it's just nonsense. They're no different from Americans. Do you see Americans willing to sacrifice their dole to save the country? I mean, suppose you told everybody here, this country is headed into bankruptcy, into debauchery, into monetary debasement. Are you willing to give up your dole? The Pentagon's not willing to let it go its dole. We've already seen that. Social Security recipients, Medicare, Medicaid, education grants, foreign aid to dictators, farm subsidies, education, Nobody wants to give up their dole. Now, everybody wants to give up everybody else's dole, right? The Pentagon says, hey, cut out the entitlements. The entitlement people say, cut out the military. But nobody wants to give up his dole, which means nobody's going to be left without a dole. I mean, this is the insidious thing about the welfare state, is that once you get people on, and the warfare state too, that once you get people on the dole, then it becomes this fierce battle, because it's like heroin. It's like an addiction. People don't want to let go of it. Oh no, I wouldn't survive without my dole. Oh my God. It's really a psychological problem. That you've got people honestly convinced that they would be dying in the streets without their dole. And, I mean, this is why you should never, ever have a welfare state. One reason, I mean, not, because there's the, of course, moral reason is wrong to take money that doesn't belong to you. I mean, that's what the whole welfare state's based on, taking money from people to whom it belongs and giving it to people to whom it doesn't belong. But there's also the psychological aspect. It destroys people's belief in themselves. I mean, people on the dole honestly believe, and even people not on the dole honestly believe, that without the dole, without Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, if you got rid of all this stuff overnight, so many people believe, people will be dying in the streets tomorrow. And it's also a self-esteem problem with respect to psychology, is that, the government is essentially saying, when they say we can't get rid of Social Security, for example, because you Americans are bad people. You're just bad people. We know you wouldn't take care of your parents, if you were free to do what you wanted with your own money. We know you wouldn't handle them if they got sick or they got elderly or on their deathbed or whatever. You're just a bad people, and therefore you've got to be forced to do this with Social Security. We got to force you to take care of the elderly in this country because this is a nation of bad, bad, bad people. Okay? That's the psychology that goes in this. Well, now that's bad enough, but what's worse is the victims of this thing, the people who are being plundered and looted to fund all these, the elderly or the sick or whatever, they believe it. I mean, the American people will sit here and say, we can't abolish Social Security because we're a bad people. We're really a bad people. We wouldn't take care of our parents if we were free to do that. We've got to be forced by this. That government, thank goodness that they're composed of saintly and selfless and caring politicians and bureaucrats. And, those Social Security, thank you for taking care of all of us bad people and forcing us to do the right thing. I mean, it's a double whammy in psychology here. You got the government saying you're a bad people. You got the American people saying you're a bad people. And so you've got this insidious welfare state mentality that just holds America in its grip. Now, what's the solution to all this? Get rid of this stuff. Just junk it. Junk welfare, junk Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. This is the root of America's problems here. Moral problems, economic problems, fiscal problems. This is the solution to, you want jobs in America, you want prosperity in America, ditch these programs and ditch them immediately. Freedom works. This is not a bad people. This is one of the most charitable people in history. They just don't understand it. They don't believe it. They don't believe in themselves. But it's true. You just got to have faith in yourselves, and you got to have faith in others. You got to have faith in your country. Not faith in coercion and force. Get rid of the Social Security Administration. Put all those people out in the private sector. Get an honest job instead of a job based on plunder and looting people. And then you got double productivity. You got the people in the private sector that now have all that Social Security money to help their parents out with. And then you got the people, the bureaucrats, the parasitic sector that are now in the private sector producing. Hey, double prosperity. You got double producers instead of one producer and one parasite taking money out of the producer's pocket. And then on the warfare state business, we need a complete paradigm challenge there too. Bring the troops home immediately. Afghanistan, Iraq, Germany. What are they doing in Germany? They still think that the Soviet Union is going to invade Germany? Ridiculous. Korea, bring them home. Bad things happen in the world. That's the nature of things. If Americans were outraged, they want to go to Vietnam and help the Vietnamese people free themselves from communism, go at it. But let's establish a model society of freedom here at home. That's the key. To establish a model society of freedom, which means ditching the welfare state, ditching the warfare state, and then showing the world how to extricate ourselves from statism. That's the key to prosperity, to harmony, to morality, to a better way of life. I've decided to cut the show down to 30 minutes, see how you guys feel about it, see how things go, get a feel for it. And so that's the end of the show. Thanks so much, and enjoyed visiting with you, and see you all next week. So long.